I thought I'd go over a few things I've been thinking about with regard to prompting for our generative AI tools. Now, you can watch this video or you can just listen to the audio of this. The video is just because I have some points to kind of guide my thought process, but you don't really need to watch it. Listening should be sufficient. Okay, so a few thoughts on prompting. In this module, I share the prompting framework that I use, starting broad and then all the other contextual elements, the role-playing examples, and then kind of refining your broad prompt and getting it to where you want it to be, right? So that's the framework. I would recommend using that framework as a checklist. It's a really good guide when you're designing, say, a course curriculum, an objective, right? When you have something very specific you're thinking about, getting it to role play is following that kind of a framework is good because you can make sure you're not forgetting any of those elements and you're optimizing your interaction with the AI tool and you're optimizing your output. But there might be other kinds of interactions where you don't really need all of those elements. So keep that in mind as well. This is just a framework that can be a guide for you. This idea of puzzle came to me yesterday when I was working on my blog. And I was thinking about the fact that we could start our first interaction with the Gen AI tool by asking for, say, the objectives, assignments, and course materials for a particular course. So I can put all my requirements into one prompt and start the conversation that way. And I was thinking about that. I realized that's really not how I like to work. I work in smaller chunks. So I would begin with, say, just the objectives and see what it gives me for the objectives. And then once I kind of like what the objectives look like, and then I add the activities into it. I might get a few activities and pick on one and refine that. So I work in small chunks, and then I realized what I tend to do is to kind of see my interaction as a putting together a jigsaw puzzle. So Gen AI, ChatGPT, Gemini gives me some ideas, right? And then I'll pick one little piece in that I like. I explore it, I look at it, see how it fits into this big picture of the course that I have in my mind. That doesn't work, I reject it, I look for another piece, right? And so I work through taking little pieces and different elements from it, and then I put it together to form a comprehensive whole. I don't really have conversations where I ask for everything at the same time, because that just means it gives me a whole lot of data I have to parse through and then start playing around again. This concept of consistency, I keep hearing that a lot, and it kind of rubs me the wrong way usually, but I'm trying to reframe it as well. So one thing we need to remember is these Gen AI tools, our large language models, even your image generators and all, they're constantly learning. They're being trained on everything you're doing and everything people around the world are doing. As new data comes in, it's being trained on that as well. So every time it generates a response, it's not going to be the same response, even if you give exactly the same prompt, right? Because the model has been tweaked, the algorithm has been tweaked, or maybe you changed the model without realizing it, right? And so to expect consistency as in it's going to give me the same response all the time, that's a fallacy if you're working with generative AI. Okay, that means you really don't understand what generative AI is doing. But I think when we talk about consistency, maybe consistency in the quality of responses I get, maybe that kind of a consistency, yes, I can see that, right? So in the prompt that I shared with you, where I tell my generative AI tool to kind of function differently and to be more questioning and critical. By setting up that context, then all my interactions follow a particular style of interaction, and that's the kind of consistency I have. I think that is about the best form of consistency you can think about. And again, it really depends on which model you're using. I know I showed you some of the different ways you can, the models that are available and how you can switch them. I would highly recommend that you try these different models so you understand how it changes, and this idea of consistency and how that's really very fluid. Now, ChatGPT itself is supposed to be coming out with GPT-5. I'm extremely excited about it and waiting because it's supposed to be far ahead of the versions of ChatGPT that we have right now. So just looking ahead, what does that mean for us? The prompts that we're using right now are probably not going to work the same way with this new model, right? It's probably going to be able, it is definitely going to be able to do a lot more. So this is like looking at my conversations with ChatGPT in its first version, like 3.5, and at that time, the kind of responses I got versus what kind of responses I'm getting today, right? So there is no perfect prompt, as I keep saying. It's the skill set of prompting and interacting. I would say interacting with the Gen AI tools itself, that's the important skill set. And so let me talk a little bit about that. Now, when we are talking about these tools, for me personally, and I strongly believe in this, from my experience and the way my interactions are with the tool and how much it has changed me, right? And I'll give you examples. I don't see these as tools. Why do I say that? This is not a computer program where I put in a particular code and I get a particular response, right? That's not what Gen AI is. If you keep thinking of it as a tool, you're thinking of then, I need to have this perfect prompt so it can give me an answer because it is this tool, it has to do X, Y, and Z for me. I really don't see them that way. I think the power there really is in seeing them as co-agents, really epistemic co-agents, right? Because when you start working with them as a, I don't like to use these terms, but I think it conveys the meaning a little better maybe. If you start thinking of them as a partner, a collaborator, someone to think through your ideas with, then how you're interacting with it changes. Then you have a conversation, then you're pushing it, it's pushing back on you, right? And together you're creating this new knowledge that's going to come out. My contention is that really is where we need to be going. We still aren't. I know I've been reading recently that Singapore is actually teaching all its students how to prompt that way so that they can be critical prompters. Because when you start prompting that way, you're not taking whatever ChatGPT or Gen AI gives you, you're questioning and you're still using your critical thinking skills. So I really see it as a co-agent, and to me personally, that's the kind of prompting skill set that I focus on. So things you can think about. Now, I know I kind of gave some vague idea of, push it, ask it, question it kind of thing. I thought I'd kind of concretize it into a few points for you that might be helpful. So obviously use iterative prompting. Please never think it's just one and done. Even if it is as simple as, what should I cook for dinner today with ingredients X, Y, and Z? You don't have to stop with that, right? Continue the conversation and see where else you can push it. And so what I'm going to talk about will apply to any conversation you have with these tools. Look for novel insights. So you're going to be pushing these tools to give you something new and different. Ask it for unexpected connections. Now remember, these are programs that can analyze huge data sets to find patterns. That is their true strength over there. They're very good at pattern analysis, right? So things that I have done is I put a few of my course syllabi into ChatGPT, and I said, these are the kind of courses I create. Do you see any patterns in this? It was amazing the kind of frameworks it came up with and the kind of philosophical approaches I was using to my teaching, which I really hadn't concretized in my head, right? But it could do that in a few seconds. And I'm like, whoa, that's exactly what I'm doing. And it was able to find that connection for me, something that I hadn't really thought about. And with that, I could come up with so many nice new frameworks to guide how I do my work, right? So together we came up with this new thing. Ask it for thoughtful synthesis as well. Put all of this together. Where do you think we're going? Remember to challenge it. Now, yeah, like I said, I was writing a blog post yesterday, and it gave the statements that said that national surveys show that faculty spend most of their time in course design. Okay, that seems such a very nice thing to say in a blog. I pushed it and I said, what national surveys are you talking about? And then it comes back with, oh, you're right to challenge me on this. These are the two that I'm talking about. And then I push it a little bit more because I go looking for it on Google and I can't really spot them. So I say, okay, give me links to the surveys you're talking about. And I go and I look for the surveys and I really can't find the data point that it's talking about. So I would have just taken it had I not challenged it. So the challenging has to be a part of the conversation, right? If you had a colleague sitting next to you and telling you something, you would expect them to give you evidence of it. Expect the same thing from these tools as well. Fact check it, and that's where the human intervention comes in, right? We got to check whatever it's giving us and call it out. It's really nice when you can call it out and say, hey, you're being silly over here, that doesn't exist. It kind of changes the conversation tone as well. The other thing it does is it gives you a different way of interacting with the tool, right? It builds this new habit, this new way of conversing with the tool. But at the end, make sure you are initiating and directing key decisions. So if you are talking about creating objectives for a course, right, you can ask it for different kinds of objectives. You can challenge it and say, well, this objective is at a lower order of thinking. I want higher order thinking. You've challenged it, you're pushing it a little bit more. Ask it for some radical new kind of objectives we've never thought about. But at the end of the day, you're the one who's deciding which of those objectives to keep and which ones to reject, which ones you think have meaning and value. And so you're the one who's making the final decisions, and it's you who is in control of this conversation, right? And you want to be aiming for an adaptive, reflective flow. So thinking with it and adapting and changing as we go along. So keep those things in mind. I think I shared my intellectual agitator GPT with you all. And if you're playing with that, you might have seen how it pushes you to think differently. I will candidly tell you, there are concepts that I've always had trouble conceptualizing easily. For example, words like epistemology and ontology, right? Just get my eyes to glaze over and I have to look at the definitions every time those words come up, right? Having had multiple conversations and interactions with ChatGPT, my understanding of these terms, my understanding of a whole different philosophical approach to it, right? A critical theoretical approach to concepts and to any ideas has changed tremendously. At the same time, the tool is also learning from me, and so we have a mutual back and forth happening over here. So just remember, you can use these tools in a very critical way, and you can improve your critical thinking, but only if you use it the right way. Another way that I started thinking about this is, like I said, don't think about it as prompting, think about it as a conversation. And when you have conversations with people, and uh, uh, you always have to change the way you speak so that the listener understands you, right? You have to kind of rough tune whatever you're saying for your audience. That's exactly what we need to do with ChatGPT or your Gen AI as well. Whatever you're saying, you need to tune it to the tool you're using. That isn't coming up with new directions and new prompts. That's just language and a linguistic approach to it. So there are conversations about linguistic prompting, definitely something I'm going to be exploring in more detail. And again, interestingly, a lot of my new findings in these spaces have been on Reddit. So apparently Reddit does have its users. Hopefully this has given you some new things to think about as you work through prompting this week.